Hello and welcome to Alternate Dimensions Zendikar Rising Set Review. I am your host and owner of Alternate Dimensions, Brad. And so tonight we're going to go over the blue cards from the set. And these are going to be cards that I think are the ones we're going to go over are going to be the ones that I think are going to be playable in the standard, pioneer, and or modern formats. I'll gloss over the limited ones as well. But for the most part, we're going to be talking only about the constructed worthy cards. So, Anti-Cognition is the first card. Lets you counter a creature or planeswalker unless they pay 2. But it has a bonus if your opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard. You get to counter. You instead counter the spell outright without having to pay the 2 to stop you, and you get to scry 2. So there's a particular deck, besides mill decks, that absolutely want this. There's a particular aggro deck in this format that's going to want this, and that's going to be it's going to be rogues, and we'll talk about that in a little bit when we get into their abilities and see what they do. It's not dead early and it's not dead late. That's what you want in a counter spell. Obviously, this just hitting creatures and planeswalkers is not perfect because you still have the instant sorceries, enchantments, and artifacts to deal with. But that's sort of the role that they've given you with pieces of control magic these days. It's not just 2-mana counter spell. You've got to be flexible in what you do and how you choose to do it. So Bubble Snare. This is a card that uses kicker. If you pay the additional mana, you get to tap the creature, and then it just locks down. It doesn't untap. So not a lot of these effects usually enter their standard format or older formats. So by and large, this is it's going to be a limited card, unless there's some broken kicker deck that needs a huge number of kicker spells to be better. This will be reserved for limited only. Alright, Cascade Seer, 4 mana for a 3/3 that scries X, where X is the number of creatures in your party. Again, party is one of the new mechanics, and it's basically you're checking to see if you have at least one creature of each of the 4 classes: cleric, rogue, warrior, and wizard. Again, don't see constructed in its future, but definitely a good limited card. It's at least going to be a 3/3 that scries you 1 because it's already a wizard, and you get bonuses if you have the others. So, alright, Charex the Raging Isle. 4 mana for a 0/17 legendary crab. Spells that your opponent casts a target and costs 2 more, and you can pay 3 to give it +X, -X, until end of turn, where that's the X is the number of islands you control. Its first legendary crab, as I heard and read about. 0/17 is humongous. Be glad it doesn't have Defender, because otherwise you'd be seeing a 4 mana 17/17 in Arcadis. And Doran the Siege Tower would absolutely love the butt on this thing. I mean, turn 6, you could make it a 12/5 if you used all 8 mana or all 6 mana. If you had all islands, but definitely interesting. The biggest wall we've ever seen. That can certainly get aggressive when it needs to, and it ends the game quick. So potential control deck finisher. I don't know. It's going to dodge a lot of the removal spells in this format on the turn after you cast it. So, could be a safe bet. Alright, Chilling Trap. Combat Trick with a bonus if you have a wizard. I've seen some of these played in certain formats, in constructed. I think there was one in the old fairies deck, blue-black fairies deck, that gave -1/-1 to a creature, and then if you controlled a fairy, you drew a card. That saw a little bit of constructed play. Again, could be a wizard build that wants this. I honestly don't think so. I think this again is more of a limited card that has an upside if you control a wizard, which especially if you're drafting, you're gonna fall into that boat most of the time. So Cleric of Chill Depths. It's a fine creature for limited. Might actually have a little constructed application. A 1/3 for 2 mana blocks a lot of the small aggro creatures, and then blocks the creature down for the next turn. So could be a potential wall, but I think there would be better things to be doing at 2 mana in particularly control decks. Now, if you're using this aggro on aggro and using this to lock down certain creatures when they swing in to give you to swing and get extra attacks in, that might be viable as well. Still, I would be putting my money on this being a limited format card only. Alright, Concerted Defense. 1 mana, instant counter non-creature spell unless its controller pays 1 plus an additional 1 for each creature in your party. So on the surface, it's automatically a force spike. Even if you don't have any creatures in play, or any creatures that count as your party, if you have at least 1 in play, it's a spell pierce. So there's definitely some thought to it being constructed playable at that point, because it's now it more than likely you're only gonna probably here you're gonna either have wizards or rogues. You might have both, so you might have a mana leak out of it. Don't think it's going to scale all the way up unless you're limited and you drafted it, or you've gotten lucky with your shield pool. But it's definitely some protection. Counter magic is somewhat good in constructed formats, I hear. Here again, it's probably not going to be anything over a mana leak, so be cautious about how many you stack in your deck. But I definitely could see some being playable in standard. Wrong direction. Alright, Confounding Conundrum. So this 2 mana enchantment replaces itself, and when your opponent has a second or more second, third, fourth land enter the battlefield under their control this turn, they have to return a land they control to its owner's hand. This ability does stack, so if you have multiple copies of this enchantment in play, then they have to return multiple lands when their second or latter land enters play. So obviously there are ramp decks in standard that are going to be using things like Uro, Azusa, and Cultivate. Potentially even what Predator's Path is. I think is the 4 mana one that cycles. So there's some potential to mess up a little bit of the ramp there. But where I look at this card hard is Modern and Legacy. Forcing your opponent to use their fetches on your opponent's turn. They can't play the fetch on their turn and then immediately search for it. So there's some math that's involved there. If they play it and search for it, they're going to bounce a land to the hand. And this also has some neat little tricks with other cards in the format. So Field of Ruin will trigger it if they played a land and then you field one of theirs and they search for a land. They'll put the land into play and then they have to return a land to their hand. Ghost Quarter is another one that'll trigger off this. So there's some next level playing, building, designing that you can get into. I really see, while this may be intentional to slow down the standard format, I also see it affecting older formats, particularly ones where there's fetch lands in play that normally they might want to play a fetch and search for the land they need immediately, or they may play a fetch and then play a second fetch the next turn and then pop them both at the same time to get the mana they need and waiting on it. Those play lines are going to have to change with a card like this in play. Alright, Coralheim Chronicler. 3 mana 2/2. When you cast a kick spell, you get to draw a card and then discard a card. And then you can look at the top 5, reveal a card with kicker, and put it in your hand, put the rest on the bottom in random order. If there is a kicker deck, as a constructed playable deck, then this card will have a piece in the deck, particularly to find you more cards, let you cycle through your deck, find what you need, etc. I really think it's more of going to end up being a limited base card. We've had kicker in 4 or 5 expansions now in the game's history. I just don't think there's anything broken enough for it to see play in older formats. Speaking of a card with kicker, you get a 3/2 for 3 mana. It has kicker. If you paid the kicker cost, you get to bounce another target creature. So Mana War was 3 mana for 2/2 that auto bounced another creature, and this one you got to pay twice that much to bounce a creature. Not going to see any constructed play again unless there's a massively broken kicker deck of some sort. Limited only, I'm afraid. Alright, Deliberate. So this is a 2 mana Preordain. So I think what Wizards has realized is this effect is too good at 1 mana. Omen of the Sea was 2 mana, but had a bonus where you could sack it later and scry 2 again. This being an instant, scry 2, draw a card, is perfectly fine. And there are some decks that are going to want multiple effects like this. There are some decks that are going to want this because they're trying to cast spells, instants and sorceries, etc. And want these cards in the graveyard immediately. There are things like Delve and even Tarmogoyf. Tarmogoyf would probably one of those decks where you see both. Hey, here's the enchantment, I'll sack it later. There's the enchantment in the graveyard, and here's the instant. More than likely, this is. So I would say depending on which side of the fence that you're on, or the way your deck is constructed, you may see this, or you may see Oath of the not Oath of the Sea. Yeah, I've drawn a blank. Omen. Or Omen in the Sea. But you may not see both in Standard or Pioneer. Alright, Expedition Diviner, 4 mana for 3/2 flyer, and if you control another wizard, when this guy dies, he gets to draw a card. To me, it's not very exciting. This is more of a limited card that if you have out the wizards, you get a bonus when it dies. Not much else to say about that. Alright, Field Research. 3 mana, sorcery with kicker, 3 mana. Draw 2 cards, or 3 cards, draw 2 cards, or if it was kicked, draw 3 cards. So Divination, which has been a card that's been printed for a long time. 3 mana sorcery, draw 2 cards. Has been playable in some standard formats. So certainly possible that this also would be playable in standard formats. The problem with this card is it's also fighting for space in from some of the other card draw that is instant format, like Deliberate earlier, that gives you a little selection along with your card draw, as well as 6 mana for 3 cards is a little bit much. I would have liked if this card was Opportunity, which is 4 and 2 blue, which is what this plus the kicker cost would be. Draw 4 cards. That one has been reprinted a number of times and has been playable in certain formats as well. So I'm going to put this in the camp of this is mostly going to be played as a limited card, and if it's playable in Standard, it's either playable as a 2 mana draw or 3 mana draw 2, or it's playable in a kicker deck that does some ridiculous things. But right now I would say probably not. Glacial Grasp, say that 3 times fast. So this is a pretty standard card. Tap a creature, lock it down for a turn, draw a card. Oh, and it also mills 2 cards. So this is not a trick that you typically see in Standard. So and it's definitely not seen in older formats, especially at that casting cost. So moving along, Inscription of Insight. 4 mana sorcery, kicker of 2 and 2 blue. Choose 1 or choose any number if kicked. Return up to 2 target creatures from his hand. Scry 2, then draw 2 cards. And then target player creates an XX blue illusion token, creature token, where X is the number of cards in their hand. So 4 mana for one of these abilities. Or 8 mana for all 3 at sorcery speed. I can't really think this is going to see any play, except for maybe Commander. 4 mana sorcery, scry 2, then draw 2 cards has been seen before. Actually, I think it's scry 2, then draw 2. So that one's been seen before. Return up to 2 target creatures. I mean, a double bounce spell is fine, but 4 mana at sorcery speed. and then the illusion token. Okay, so I could cast this with 7 other cards in my hand and make a 7/7 or a 6/6. Alright, that's fair, but is it worth that amount with all of the with it being sorcery speed? I can't really say that it is. So this is a kicker card that will see play. Into the Royal. Return target online permanent to its owner's hand. If the spell was kicked, draw a card. This was a card from original Zendikar. It was they made a new version for Dominaria. Did the same thing. Both the versions saw play in standard format. I expect the same out of this one. And it's better if you even have kicker effects in play. Limited is a pretty good house with those additional pieces. All right, here's another one that's going to see play. Jace, Mirror Mage. So first Planeswalker with kicker. If you kicked it, you get to make a copy of it that's non-legendary and has starting loyalty of 1. So it does not protect itself, which is a small detriment. But other than that, both abilities are fine. The +1 is Scry's 2, so you get to inform your draw. The 0 is a risk if you don't know what it is. And it has no ultimate, which is perfectly fine. The decks, you can play it early if you need to get it down and get you some advantage. It's going to be kicked most of the time because you want to use the copy to Skye 2, and then you want to use the original to 0 so that you draw a card that you need or draw a land off the top of your deck. And then you start accruing the incremental advantages. This also, from what I saw from the SCG versus live series, this thing plays a lot better than it looks. Even if you have to proxy it up and test it, it's worth testing. All right, Living Tempest. This is it's just a limited card, flash flying 3/3 for 5 mana. Probably should be a 3/3 for 4 with flying, but the flash adds an extra mana to it. It's fine limited card. Constructed, get it out of here. Low Mage's Domination. So this is an uncommon. I thought this was a rare at first. Gain control of target creature with converted mana cost X. The spell costs 3 less to cast if the creature's controller has 8 or more cards in the graveyard. So again, this is another piece from the that's going to help mill decks and or rogue decks when we get to it. It's probably too cost prohibitive unless you're playing mono blue, because again there aren't that many actual dual lands in this format, and most of those interplay tapped, so be wary of that. I could, might could see it as a sideboard card, but hey, Uro, let me steal your Uro. But other than that, alright, Maddening Cacophony. 2 mana sorcery with kicker of 4. Each opponent mills 8 cards. If the spell is kicked, instead each opponent mills half their library rounded up. So There are a bunch of high-powered cards that mill, particularly in the modern format, and there was already a semi-playable mill deck in modern. This is one of the cards that may actually push that over the edge as something that is straight nuts. I'll get to it when we get to the one other particular card that is absolutely going to see play, but there's Glimpse the Unthinkable is blue and a black instant. Target player mills 10 cards. This mills 8, and then there's several creatures that mills 2 to 3 cards. So be prepared. Mill may be coming to your modern tables, whether that's whether competitive or otherwise. Somebody may bring it. Alright, Master of Winds. This one, to me, is a little underpowered. 1/4 flyer that enters the battlefield, you draw 2 cards and discard a card. And then if you trigger its ability with an instant sorcerer wizard spell, then you can flip its power and toughness. I see the theory behind the card. I see why they did it. I think if you're me, I'm looking at this card saying, okay, so I get a 1/4 flyer that draws me 2 cards and I have to discard a card. And the other ability, either I'm triggering the bottom ability a lot, or I want the card draw flyer for 4 mana. Unfortunately, I see this as a limited card, and that's it. Merfolk Falconer, 4 mana, 4/4 flyer. When you cast a kick spell, scry 2. Again, I really don't see this as a constructed worthy card, unless there's a broken kicker deck, and this is an air elemental with an additional ability for kicked cards. Gonna be something very interesting for draft format, though. Now we get to the rogues. Merfolk Windrobber. It's a flying man. When it deals combat damage to a player, the player mills a card. You can sacrifice it to draw a card, but you can only activate it if your opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard. So the rogue deck is cheap, aggressive creatures that wants to see a bunch of cards in your opponent's graveyard, and they actively mill cards in some shape, form, or fashion. You've seen the Thieves Guild, I think it's Thieves Guild Adept out of Core Set 2021, that mills 2 cards when you play it or another rogue, which is paramount to its strategy. And then there's a couple more rogues that trigger milling when attacking or dealing combat damage or other scenarios. So it wants to see 8 cards in the graveyard. Biggest detriment to this deck is escape. So you want ways to keep escape cards out of the graveyard, or ways to remove just the card with escape and get it out of the way, so that you can continuously make sure that you keep at least 8 cards in their yard. There are a few cards that do that, particularly in Theros Beyond Death. There's the Soulscar Lantern, I think it is, that lets you exile a particular card out of the graveyard, and then there's a black spell with Escape that lets you exile a card out of the graveyard, and if you exile a creature, you gain 3 life. If you exile anything else, you draw a card with it. So, be prepared to have ways to deal with escape cards, but other than that, I think this will be a fun deck to play. Negate, it's been played before. It will continue to be played as a catch-all answer to non-creature spells. Alright, so here's another rogue. Can't be blocked if you had another party member enter the battlefield this turn, so if you play a rogue, he can't be blocked. If you have a full party, then you get to draw a card when it deals combat. Your creatures deal combat damage to players, you get to draw cards. This one doesn't actively help your mill strategy, but being able to trigger it so it can get through unblockable damage is definitely good. Definitely will see some sort of play, at least in that deck, even if you don't have the full party ability. Risen Riptide, when you cast a kick spell, becomes a 5/5 on the turn instead of being a 0/5. Again, this is more than likely going to be a limited deck card. Probably not going to see a lot of constructed play, again, unless there's something broken with Kicker. Now, this is a card that certainly helps Kicker what it does. So this enchantment, you can play it for blue, and whenever you cast a kick spell, you get to make a 2/2 blue drake with flying. If you kick it, you also get a 2/2 drake for flying. So if there is some sort of long game control deck that's built around a lot of cards with Kicker that can use this card to its advantage, where you get to make a bunch of 2/2s, when you got these copies out, you can probably end the game pretty quickly. It's definitely a piece of a limited archetype. The question is there enough cards in Standard and or Pioneer for this to see play? I think it's too slow for... I even think it's too slow for Modern, even though it costs 1 to get it on the board. The other pieces are questionable, but it may be, again, some of these build around uncommons are worth definitely getting them out, proxying them, playing with them, seeing if you could come up with anything. It certainly looks like a fun deck. But a lot of the Kicker spells are overcosted or have a bigger Kicker cost, so you have to be wary of how that's going to work. Alright, so this is the other piece to the Modern mill deck. So Ruin Crab is a 0/3 for blue, and when the landfall triggers, each opponent mills 3 cards. So you have Hedron Crab, you have Ruin Crab, and then you've got the Snow Crab that triggers off snow permanents. So that's 12 crabs that mill 3, 3, and 2 respectively. Then you have the spell in this set that mills 8, or you can kick it and they mill half their library. And then you have, Glimpse the Unthinkable, which mills 10. All of those are 2 mana or less, and there's only one that uses a secondary color. If there's a mill deck that is competitive or semi-competitive in Modern, that's going to use these as your bases. Your deck is going to be in the graveyard. And honestly, there might be enough pieces to have a standard mill deck. You know, there's I think it's Merfolk Wanderer, the 0/4 that you can mill 4 cards with its adventure, and then you get to put it in play. You've got some counter magic that does some milling. You've got the Gargoyle that does some milling. So This could even be a viable strategy for standard. Alright, Seagate Stormcaller, 2 mana for a 2/1. It has kicker of 4 and a blue. When it ETBs, you get to copy the next instant or sorcery spell with CMC 2 or less that you play this turn when you cast it. If it's kicked, you get to copy that spell twice instead, and you choose all new targets for the copies. So it's not Snapcaster Mage. But then again, you don't have to cast the spell again either. There are a lot of good spells, particularly in older formats, that are CMC 2 or less. So even as just a 2 mana 2/1 that copies the next spell you play is fine. It is, unfortunately, you only play, it doesn't have flash, so you can't ambush somebody on your opponent's turn unless you really work to find a way to give it flash. I think it missing flash might mean it may not see play in Eternal formats, but the ability to copy the next spell you instant or sorcery you cast that is 2 mana or less is for play this for 2 mana. Get to copy the next one, not next spell. You get the spell and you still have a 2/1. So it might see some internal play. And depending on what all the CMC 2 or less instant sorceries are in the format, this may see some standard play as well, because the effect is fairly strong. Alright, Seafloor Stalker. This is another limited card, nothing more. Shell Shield, a blue instant. Kicker 1, target creature gets +0/+3 until end of turn. If it was kicked, it gets hexproof as well. So it's dive down that costs 1 extra. Still playable. Again, effects that want you to kick a spell are probably going to love this card as well, because it protects your creature doubly so, as well as adding the kicker to it. Skye's Clay Plundered. This is essentially 5 mana, draw 3 at sorcery speed. We were talking about one of the kicker cards earlier. That was 6 mana to draw 3. And this one is scalable based on your party, because you get to dig deeper based on that. But standard playable, it is not. Skyclave Squid, cheap defender that you can have attacks on certain turns. Again, limited card only. Sure-footed Infiltrator. Tap another target rogue you control. It can't be blocked this turn. When it deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So its biggest detriment is its 4 mana. And understated at 2/3. Obviously because it has both the ability to go through unabated as well as draw a card. I won't rule it out for standard play, but 4 mana in most formats these days are just going to need more power than that. Tazim Roll Mage, 2 mana, 2/1. If it was kicked, you get to return instant sorcery from your graveyard to your hand, and it has kicker 4. Looks like a limited card to me, Chief. Thieving Skydive. 2 mana, 2/1, flyer, kicker X. If it was kicked, you gain control of target artifact with converted mana cost X or less. If the artifact was equipment, attach it to the Skydiver. Oh, hello. So I get to steal anything that I can pay that's X or less for the kicker cost. Otherwise, it's a 2/1 flyer that happens to be a Merfolk, so fantastic. The rogue keyword may be certainly viable. You can steal any artifact. So let's say I pay 3 mana. X can't be 0, so you can't steal a Mox with this. At least not for 2 mana. You can steal one for 3 mana. And I will tell you there's some potential for this to go all the way back to vintage because it does steal the artifacts. It will see play in standard. It will probably see play in standard just as a decently statted cheap flyer. And if Warrior's equipment is playable in the metagame, then you're probably going to be using the kicker cost to steal some lower cast stuff. I doubt you're going to pay 7 and a blue for it to steal an Embercleave, but I could be absolutely wrong on that one. Just getting it off your opponent's side of the table might be pretty good. Winrider Wizard. So this again is another limited card that lets you cycle through your deck when you cast instant sorcery or wizard spells. Zulaport Duelist. 1/1 with flash. It's a rogue. You get to shriek a creature, and its controller mills 2 cards. So again, if the mill deck, if the rogue deck is viable, you're probably going to see this guy because there's already a number of flash cards in the deck. You get to ambush something, shrink something, and mill. What's not to love? Alright, double-sided cards. So the Veil here, I think it's fine. It's not an effect that you necessarily want constructed, even if it is attached to a land. So this is a rogue that you want for your rogue deck, and the ability to just copy any creature is great. If you don't have another creature out, it doubles as a land. They're definitely worthy of a look, and if you're playing rogues, you absolutely want a playset of this. Jawari Disruption. It's a 2 mana Force Spike. It is a land as well. Here again, this is a Censor was playable in other formats. The difference here is Censor cycles and gets you a better card, where this just plays as a land. But that could be relevant for your deck or this standard format. So definitely something that we'll want to experiment with. So here's the Mythic that turns into a land that bolts you, the Seagate. I don't honestly know how good the sorcery side of this card is. You get to basically double your hand size, and then you don't have a maximum hand size for the rest of the game. And 7 mana is a lot for that. But we played Sphinx's Rev. We played X spells that draw you X cards before. The main issue that I have with it is, again, it's a sorcery, and blue decks don't want to be tapping out for sorceries most of the time. Beyond that, might be worth a look. Again, you might want bolting yourself with a control deck. Usually they use their life points very use their life as a resource, so sometimes the 3 life doesn't matter. but against aggressive decks, you almost never want to put this into play untapped unless you're going to Wrath after you put it into play untapped. This one might be less good. It might be the least good of the cycle. You'll see the rest of them later. Sunduli Vision, so get to look through the top 6 cards and put an instant or sorcery in your hand and the rest of the bottom in any order. Or again, it's an island. You always want to keep your hand full, and this effect is like 1 mana more than it normally is. But for basically doubling the land, it's perfectly fine. And I could see this one seeing play, particularly control decks. They don't have a lot of finishers. They want their removal and wraths to stabilize, and then they want to find their finisher and finish the game from there. Umari Wizard, 5 mana for 4/3, and when you cast one of the relevant spells, it gains flying. This one's going to be a limited card only. I'm almost certain. The land's not going to help you here. Alright guys, that is all of the blue cards. Join us tomorrow night for the black cards. Again, I am Brad. I'm the owner of Alternate Dimensions game store in Tullahoma, Tennessee. If you use the code below, 5th Dimension, you get 5% off any order of $5 or more. Besides Magic, we also carry Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! Board games, role-playing games, and accessories. And we are your dimension for fun. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on that notification bell at the bottom. And I'll see you in the next one.